Thanks for joining us. My name is Ibrahim, Sani. There's a lot that needs to be unpacked in this particular episode, particularly when you talk about consumerism and how we need to handle new age purchasing capabilities and many more. Here to discuss this and more is Joseph Cherian, the practice professor of finance at the Asia School of Business. Joe, thanks again for taking the time to speak with us, to come all the way here. I know you are a busy man. As I understand it, you just came back from the US?
Yeah, correct. Thank you for having me.
Let's take a look into your very illustrious career. Maybe you can share with us a little bit of your background.
Oh, okay. I'm Malaysian, and I left after high school. I went to America. I studied at MIT as an engineer, worked as an engineer. Then I went back and did my master's and PhD in quantitative finance. And that's why my interest developed in finance, which is where I've been involved in since then. I was a professor of finance for a while, and then I went to industry. I was in the asset management space in New York City, or what we call Wall Street, where I ran a group managing a lot of pension assets, retirement assets for clients and so on. Did that for about 9 years, and then I came back to Singapore first to become a professor once again, so one full circle, and now Malaysia since last year.
You know, this is budget season, and I think 2 weeks ago, there's a call that says that pensions should be relooked at or thought of in a different light. It's also important for us to take a look into the pension bill that our government now has to foot. And it's just only going to grow even more as we age or progress becoming an aged country. Maybe you can explain to us a little bit more in terms of the concept of self-funded government-guaranteed public pension, the way we see QAP is handling it, or a social security savings fund. How do you think these two concepts are being practiced around the world, and how do you think this is going to be implemented, if ever, in Malaysia?
Okay, so most countries started off with what's called defined benefit pension plans. So you work for a certain period with the company, and then they pay you a pension that's a portion of your salary. But many countries found that unsustainable. Mm-hmm. Many companies and countries found it unsustainable. Mm-hmm. So they moved to what's called defined contribution plans. That means it's self-funded. Mm-hmm. So you put the money aside along with your employer into your own account. Mm-hmm. And that's the program that Singapore and Malaysia practice called the EPF.
CPF and the
CPF in Singapore, correct, and the EPF in Malaysia. It's not self-directed, it's self-funded in the sense that it's not self-directed means you don't have to make your own investment choices. In America, many of the defined contribution plans, you have to make your own investment choices because they're mostly privately run. Of course, there are some public ones as well. But in Malaysia and Singapore, we're actually quite blessed. The government handles the investments for you. Mm-hmm. In Malaysia, the EPF does what's called liability-driven investing. That means they know they have a set of liabilities to pay out in the mm-hmm. future. That's your pension, your mm-hmm. retirement money. Mm-hmm. But they will invest it to grow the assets. In Singapore, they follow a slightly different approach. They call it asset liability management. So when you put $1 and your employee puts another $1, they invest it in bonds, government bonds, that pay a very high interest. And that's just simple. No investment skill needed. You just buy bonds. So it's different systems, but both are self-funded.
Just to clarify, because the reason why one would buy bonds is because it's a fixed income and therefore gives even a low return, but actually a steady return over the long term.
It's guaranteed because it's a government bond. You're sure that 30 years from now, the bond is still there, the government is still alive, it'll pay you the money that it promised. So that's the reason why it's low risk nature. The way the EPF does it is a bit more high risk, although they hold a lot of bonds, but many well-run pension funds approach it that way. So the key to it is to have a professional staff to manage your assets like a fund manager.
Also, just to provide some key highlights, while there are plenty of asset classes inside EPF, in equities, real estate, even cash, they hold, I think, sizable, 5-6% cash. They do hold fixed income as well, bonds as well. But even though it's a high risk, they have been returning quite a sizable amount of return on their own fund, double digits to a point where they can actually allocate 6% or 5% annually to us.
Correct.
And because of the asset classes that is hedged towards economic climates, they can actually earn more from other asset classes even if they earn less from other asset classes. It's a brilliant way of doing things, but you're right, professionals do it. How do you see this tied up with say, for instance, the 401k in the US? Maybe you can compare and contrast that.
So in the 401k program, what they do normally is the trustees of the fund will allocate it to managers. That means they'll say, here are the bunch of managers, BlackRock, Wellington, Fidelity, who are assigned to manage the funds. They'll negotiate the fees and so on. It's called self-directed because the employee has to make the decision as to where to invest it, which is a bit tricky. Some people who have no finance background, you're asking them all of a sudden to make investment decisions that will hold for their entire life up to retirement.
Yeah.
That's a tall ask. Many people get confused. So personally, I'm of the opinion that a system like the EPF is good. You let the professionals in the EPF manage the money for you in a very risk-adjusted, conservative way. They take a bit of risk, but they know the risk is measured and so on. And that's why, as you pointed out, Ibrahim, they can provide you with pretty good dividends.
Yeah.
It's been as high as 8.7%, if you remember, back in the 1980s. Now it's a bit lower, but still 5 to 6, 7%, that's still a pretty good number.
It is. And because of the cost of fund and cost of managing those funds is actually quite low or negligible, I remember it being 0.25%.
That sounds about right. It's a very low cost way of managing. CPF is also the same, about 10 to 20 basis points.
Yeah, and then if you go outside to a unit trust, there, you're looking at 2%, 3% even.
Absolutely,
so even if
you're
they
correct.
return 6, 7, 8%, the net returns is just 4%.
That's absolutely correct.
Okay, let's talk. So that is one area that we're exploring. Another area, before we marry these two components together, another area is the pay-as-you-go pension contributions. What would be the challenges of doing it this way, and how do you think this applies in the Malaysian economic context?
Okay, pay-as-you-go is also a very tricky system because if you have an aging population, that means there are more, if you look at the population pyramid, there are more people at the top. Yeah, exactly.
It's a diamond. Eventually, it'll be an inverted, I don't know what you call that, trapezoid or
maybe trapezoid. I forgot my
geometry. But so, it's not a nice,
Yeah, because we don't have enough young people, working population, supporting the older people. That's pretty much what it is. And there are more and more people hitting old age, and they're living longer too. So you've got a problem. When you have a diminishing number of workers, the support group, supporting a larger number of people who live longer, you have a problem. It's not sustainable. That's what America is finding out through their social security system. It's a pay-as-you-go system. That means the current generation, through taxes, what they call social security taxes, pays for the retirees. Now, of course, that's not enough. So what happens, the government issues bonds, the US government issues bonds to pay for it. It's a big part of the US government's expenditures to issue bonds. And that's why they always have a fight with Congress about issuing more bonds, because they got to pay for military, for the pension funds and stuff like that. So whether we use a pay-as-you-go system, we have to think carefully whether it's sustainable. Because you either finance it with working class people, those who are still in the industry and of a working age, or the government issues bonds to finance it. We have to decide how to finance these things. My view is that there is a class of people who need the government support. They cannot survive without the government providing them some kind of basic income. So there's a group of people who qualify for this kind of what I call a basic pension. I think that's a must, especially the way things have gone after the pandemic and stuff like that. But the majority of people should still have a self-funded program that's prudently managed, that can convert to a lifetime payout system that helps us survive our retirement days.
What would be the problems that you can mention when it comes to the social security pay-as-you-go system that we see in the US right now, and how does it contextualize to Malaysia, assuming we're doing it?
Well, let me give you an example in Malaysia's context. America is a huge problem. We are a smaller country, population of 30 million maybe. I saw an academic study from our local professors that said just to pay a basic wage of $2,700.
Ringgit.
Ringgit, 2,700 ringgit, up to the 70th percentile of income of retirees' households, projected. It'll cost 40 billion ringgit an annum. 40 billion ringgit.
And of course, when inflation is going to grow.
That's going to grow, exactly, because you can't keep it at 2,750. You have to grow it by inflation levels, and that means the pie is going to grow, the requirement is going to grow. That's a lot of money just for basic income. So we have to be creative how we're going to fund these. That's why I say you can't cover everyone. you've got to cover the people who need it the most, those in the lower income group. They need to get some kind of wage.
You're propagating an increased or widening the social net.
Yes. The social net should be needs-based. That means those who actually have no means to support themselves, and there are quite a few in Malaysia who are in that, fall in that category.
A lot, though.
I think that's the government's role to ensure that they have enough. We don't want to have too many programs where everyone has to dig around and see,
I was about to, yeah.
where shall I go look for
Yeah.
the money to make ends
Yeah.
meet. That's very sad. We should have one system, like in Singapore, they have one system to help those who basically they've called Comcares and Silver Support, to help those who fall within the cracks, between the cracks. But the rest of them should be self-funded. That means incentivize them. The Singapore government is very good at incentivizing. That means matching, topping up, giving you subsidies and all that stuff to ensure that you contribute as much as you can for your own retirement. And of course, if you fall between the cracks along the way because of medical reasons or whatever, there's a support system there. But you have to qualify for it. It's not given to everyone.
What about those that are in the M40 group, even when they are in the old age? They don't necessarily qualify for that, but they're not as rich as their counterparts.
Yeah.
They're always squeezed. How do you manage that kind of...
So this is a big issue now. Many countries are facing this. The middle income group is also getting squeezed out because of inflation. So we need to find ways to support them, like basic needs and so on. Maybe there can be some way in which we can subsidize, but it shouldn't be a blanket system because we can't afford it. Let's be frank. Most countries can't afford it, and Malaysia also can't afford it. So we have to be very creative about how we support. We don't want people to free ride or take advantage of the system as well. If you can afford to save, do it now and do it through this nationally mandated system. I can tell you, we are very blessed in both countries. People may criticize, both countries criticize their pension funds. In Singapore they complain, Malaysia they complain.
It's a sibling rivalry that will stand the test of time, Joe.
Right, but the thing is, even though the citizens complain about their pension funds in both countries equally loudly, I can tell you as an expert who's coming from America, spent 30 plus years in America, we have some of the best systems in the world here in Asia. The only problem,
EPF or CPF?
EPF and CPF, both of us. And both countries complain. Don't misunderstand. Both citizenry complain. They say the government's stealing my money, keeping my money. Whatever it is, I'm telling you, they're keeping it low cost, as you pointed out. It's very, very low cost. They're pooling the risks. What better way to pool the risk nationally so costs come down, right? You share all the different risks, mortality risk, longevity risk, health risks. You share it among all the citizens, then the risk adjusted
because the risk is distributed.
So your returns also improve. So
the biggest grouses that I hear from my Singaporean relatives is that they are unable to withdraw lump sum upon hitting retirement. That is an idea that EPF is thinking of right now. As I understand it, it is optional for EPF members to withdraw or draw their pension funds in a monthly manner, but soon it could be made mandatory the way we see it in CPF or in Singapore.
That you cannot withdraw.
And that you cannot withdraw lump sum, and you can only take like a pseudo salary, if you will.
So in full disclosure, I used to serve on the government advisory panel in the Singapore CPF, and I was one of the members of the advisory panel that recommended some of the changes you saw. The reason is because
my family members will go after.
They'll go after me. Yeah, not many
these are Singapore half.
Yeah, I know.
But they understand why. Right? So what I'm trying to say is they understand why.
I'm speaking as a neutral person, looking out for the best interests of your relatives who live in Singapore, and the same for Malaysia. It's been proven in various countries, in various pension plans, and in various academic studies. When you give people a lump sum, all of a sudden there's this illusion of money. Wow, I've got so much money in my hands. You don't realize actually the lump sum with the time value of money and inflation,
it's so small.
it goes away very quickly.
So small,
it goes away very quickly. So what happens when you give them a lump sum, but in 10 years it's gone?
No, not even.
Maybe less. Okay.
Yeah.
So
I thought there's a study somewhere. Oh my God, I keep on.
Depends how big a spender you are.
Yeah,
They're all
I
in
think
terms
like
of
2 years or 3 years. Something like 50% finishes the lump sum in 3 years, another 20%.
It's possible.
Something like that.
It's possible.
Yeah.
But the thing is, it decays very quickly. It's just a human nature to say, hey, let me take that vacation in Vietnam. Now I've got this lump sum. When you may not need it right away, you need to think about your future, your medical costs in retirement, your expenses in retirement, and so on. So Singapore government introduced what's called the CPF Life. it converts a portion. It's not mandatory, but it allows you up to a cap to convert the accumulated sum at the age of 50, 60. You get paid out 65, but at the age of 55, they'll set it aside, the accumulated sum, and it converts to a life annuity. For life, you'll get an income, and you can adjust it at the cost of living. It's a fixed adjustment until you pass away.
And this is extremely critical for Singaporeans because life expectancy is at 86.
82, 86 for males
male,
versus
female,
females.
yeah. So you need this long tail risk management.
Absolutely. No, you got it right. You sound like you learned, you're trained well in finance.
Thank you,
Ibrahim.
Thank you very much.
And you're stealing a lot of my thunder.
Oh, no lah, Joe, come on.
Seriously, no, you've said all the right things. And this is what we are trying to communicate to the people, that this is, I have no benefit from this personally. I'm just saying this is the way it will help you. Because you don't want to find that you hit the age of 90 and you're still alive, and you have no more money left, right? With the life income, annuity income, you're guaranteed up to the point of death that you will be getting an income and you don't have to worry about your subsistent living. So I think that's the right way to do it. Take the cumulative sum and create into a life annuity. We don't have that program in Malaysia yet. Singapore started it. It's quite successful in my opinion. We need to think about that as well.
But wouldn't this create that defined contribution stress to manage long-term risk for their EPF members?
What happens is there's a EPF will manage the money for you, right? There's no stress. EPF manages.
No, I'm talking about the portfolio stress because now EPF has to think about converting a portfolio of their fund size to be distributed to manage life annuity for the members, assuming some of the members.
Right. So
by the way, I'm one of those that will want to opt into this. I'm assuming I'm going to live well into my 90s.
Yeah.
I need some sort of a
Good
pseudo
for you.
pension.
Good for you. That's the way I think I would do it too. In fact, I do my own program, which is pseudo life annuities. I do it through treasury bonds in America. I used to buy them in what we call laddered portfolios because we didn't have a life annuity program.
Yeah.
I created my own annuity program, so I practice what I preach. From the 90s, I've been buying treasury bonds in the US in what we call a laddered bond portfolio, 30-year bonds. Every year.
So you've been at it for 3 decades.
Yeah, that's right. So that's our safety net.
Yeah.
What if the 401k, the Social Security all blows up?
Fails, yeah.
I need to have a safety net. Now, of course, I'm assuming the US government won't blow up, that it'll pay its obligations on the treasuries.
It was an unthinkable idea, before. Now with McCarthy and everything's happening.
In the 90s it was unthinkable. Now we are.
I don't know.
Agree. But that's the way I did it. So, but now in Singapore, they do it for me. So you're right that they have to manage the investments such that they can make the payouts. But what better entity than the government to do that for you?
Yeah.
Because the government can still, it has natural resources, it has petroleum, it has got taxation capability, it's got various ways in which to provide you that income. Can you imagine if you get your annuity from an insurance company and 20 years after retirement you find out you are still alive, your insurance company is dead. You know what I mean? Went bankrupt. You don't want that to happen, right? So my view is the government is the best provider. It sure puts stress on the government, but they have to prudently manage their budgets such that they can promise to give what they have set aside. I mean, you set aside money for it. It's self-funded. So I still think it's the most optimal way to organize the life annuity program, but it's not a get-rich scheme. That's why in Singapore, there's a cap. You can't just put all your money aside for this annuity. You can put it up to a cap, I think up to 2,700 Sing dollars or something a month, and then the rest of it you have to buy private annuities. Go to a life insurer and get that going. So we should think of the same thing here.
Because of the budget, the Defined Benefit Pension Fund, COAP, is now, it's not just it's now, actually it's always been in focus.
Yeah.
We're looking at 1.6 million existing civil servants, a large chunk of them subscribing to Defined Benefit, and assuming they live well into their 80s or 90s, we're looking at a stress of untold epic proportions when it comes to this. To unwind is a big problem, so anything that the government decides to do, at least in this budget or in the budgets to come, it is not retrospective, it's not going to be clawback to the kind of arrangements that they've made. But what would be your views on this, Joe? Do you think that you really need to transition the Defined Benefit folks out to become defined contributors?
Let me tell you what's the American experience. 90% of the private defined benefit programs have moved it over to a defined contribution.
Enforced, mandatory,
Mandatory, it was forced. because
retrospective.
well, from not those who are already grandfathered will
Yeah,
continue,
okay.
but talking from this point
yeah,
on,
yeah,
they will have to.
yeah.
Or even those who are in the previous program, it's sold to an insurance provider who will convert whatever they had promised as pension
Yeah, okay.
into a
So,
life annuity.
the substance may be defined benefit, but the form is defined contribution.
Yeah, so at least for those who are grandfathered, they will still get their payouts, but it may not be as high as what they were promised. It won't be 70% of your last
Yeah,
drawn
last-
salary
yeah.
because it's handed over to MetLife, for example.
Yeah.
They will actually transfer the portfolio, their liability portfolio,
Yeah.
over to MetLife and
Yeah.
say, MetLife, you do your actuarial calculations within your balance sheet capabilities. Now you take over our pension fund. So they've actually so it's still a pension fund, but it's sold to MetLife.
Did the out of
That was
curiosity-
90% in
No,
of private.
did the holders or the members have any say in the transfer?
Well, there's no choice. I mean, the unions are very upset, but the fact is there's no choice. It's going bankrupt. That's what happens. You know, you make promises you can't keep. It's unsustainable. That's what's going to happen.
Okay, wow.
So this is where, but co-op is different. It's a government pension fund. I'm talking about private pension funds.
Got it.
In America. That's the 90% number I gave. In a co-op, the government made these obligations and promises and so on. We may have to rethink how we make those promises. You know, in some cases, I think the pension extends to family members as well. That means after the main caregiver, the civil servant passes away, the spouse can continue to receive. They have to rethink that because, you know, it's not sustainable or even the indexing. Can they afford to index it to inflation every year? The other option, the more drastic option, which is politically sensitive, is to move it into a defined contribution plan. Whatever I've set aside, $50 billion US, move it over to a defined contribution plan and tell everyone from now on, you contribute and with some guarantees. The government has to give some guarantees because it's their plan, right? So they have to provide some kind of subsidies or top-ups or whatever. But I think we have to seriously consider whether we can meet these obligations.
We can't. That's the simple answer and that's the simple truth to it. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about your book. In it, you talk about market-based pricing checks. We're looking at how, in the Malaysian context, we can look at a market-based pricing mechanism for our annuity liability.
Okay.
How do you think we can contextualize it locally here?
Okay, I think you're referring to the chapter where I talk about the US
Yes.
life annuity program.
Yes.
So the way it works is there's actually a portal. You can go to the internet. In fact, I've actually gone to the portal a few times and I find the programs are not as attractive as putting into treasuries, because treasuries is zero cost.
Yeah.
I can do it myself because I'm trained in finance.
Yeah.
But if you don't have the training, you want to go to insurance provider. It's just the cost thing. We talked about cost before. It's kind of expensive. But the nice thing, the way the US portal works, is all the insurance providers, MetLife, Aetna, New York Life, whoever they are, will come to the portal and you say what you need in terms of annuity income. And then they'll tell you this is the cost of the premium that you put aside. They bid for it. So you supposedly get the lowest cost annuity price to convert to an income stream that you want. No guarantee the counterparty will survive for the years that you live, but at least it's AAA rated companies and stuff like MetLife and so on. So in America, you can actually benchmark. So when I look at a treasury, because I know how to replicate and create an annuity myself, I can do a treasury bond portfolio, as I told you, and I look at the annuity price, I say, no, I'd rather do a treasury bond because the costs are very low. But if we can get competitive on the annuity side, we can actually get a reference of pricing. That's what I mean by pricing. How much does it cost? So once you have the pricing determined in the marketplace, you can actually benchmark for all other annuities. So the government can also say, look, this is what you get for $100,000 of premium. This is the payout, say $10,000 per year, okay? So the government said, I will at least beat that, because you know what I mean? It's a government. It can do risk pooling that the insurance company can't do so efficiently. So at a minimum, the government, if it provides an annuity scheme, can look at what the private sector is offering and beat that, because they are the lowest cost provider, as we discussed earlier.
Your book, Track to the Future, talks about some of the ideas on investment, pensions, and many more. What would be some of the 2 or 3 key highlights that if people want to look at the book, that you want to focus their attention on?
Okay, I cover many areas. Pensions is just one of the areas. I also cover about digital economy and infrastructure finance and so on, but let's leave that aside. The bulk of my book is on retirement finance. The 2 things that come out, and this is practiced in many countries, including Singapore. One is the annuity program. We must have a scheme in place that a Malaysian like yourself, Ibrahim, and myself can take the cumulative sum and convert it to a basic life income, a safety net income for life. That should be provided within the EPF.
When I was a young man, I wouldn't even think about this. As I enter my 40s, I couldn't think anything else but retirement. It's unbelievable. And my children are now entering university.
Wow.
Yes. It's not that. It's criminal for me not to have thought about this earlier. That's the word I'm looking for.
Well, I won't go that far, but I would say that in my book, you'll notice I mentioned you've got to start early. It's never too young to start.
Well, if I live until 90, there's 50 years ahead of me. Think about it that way.
So basically, I think the advice I hope your viewers will take is to start early. Don't delay your retirement.
Doesn't matter if you're 50, even 60, even doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter. You should.
It would have been nicer if you started at
earlier.
like what, 25.
Exactly.
But
then you have a longer runway. But that said, even if you're 40 or 50, start thinking seriously about your retirement, how to save for it, and look for the best products that allow you to do that. It's also tax advantage. So if you actually pay taxes, you get a sort of tax offset for contributing to your pension fund. That's also nice. There's a SRS scheme as well.
Yeah.
Or PR, what do they call that? Here, SRS in Singapore, here it's called PR.
Yeah.
PRS, I think.
Yeah.
The private
retirement scheme. Yeah.
So, but it has to be improved. A lot of things have been improved. The costs are too high.
I can go on a tirade talking about PRS.
The costs are just too high. I look at the way it is in Malaysia.
You want to look at 25 basis points, this is about it.
Yeah.
Or 50 at most. You can't go with 300, 400 basis points.
It's just crazy because I still see
What's the
275 basis points cost on
You gotta
some
be
of the
kidding
funds.
me.
It's
You gotta be
just
kidding
unbelievable. And then they have loads too.
Yeah.
In Singapore, it's against the law. No loads for retirement funds. No sales, so it means no commissions.
For us to have the no loads for retirement funds as a law in Malaysia, I mean, there's so many things that we need to do first before you get to that stage.
Exactly.
Anyway,
So
Joseph Cherian is a practice professor of finance at the Asia School of Business. He writes a book called Track to the Future, talking about pension funds and pension finance. If you're my demography, you should be thinking about pension or retirement finance at a very serious light. It's not that easy to think about retirement, but it is what it is. So do check his book out. My name is Ibrahim Sani. Catch you in the next one.